Now, let's get into some tactical things. And Ryan, maybe you can talk about your funnel, but I'll just be straightforward and explain and answer. I use Zoom. The reason I use Zoom is because I'm already paying for the service. Zoom has a webinar feature that allows me to host. We're using it right now with
Yep.
reminders, emails. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but for me, it's the cheapest because I'm already paying for it and I don't have to learn something different. So I can throw in polls, I can do all this stuff because Zoom's got a lot of integrations. I personally use Zoom. Ryan, what about you? How should a founder make this decision?
I would say spend way more time thinking about what you're going to do on the webinar and after the webinar and leading up to the webinar than how you're actually going to execute it. From a platform perspective, it kind of doesn't matter. Webinar Jam, Google Meets, I mean, like, not my favorite platform. Microsoft Teams, dear God. You know, it kind of doesn't matter, right? As long as there aren't technical challenges thrown up by the platform, then it really doesn't matter. I think that the nice thing about Zoom, to your point, is not only do you know how to use it, so does pretty much everybody else in the world at this point. We've all spent the last couple of years post-pandemic living on Zoom. It kind of doesn't matter, right? I don't want people to get too caught up in the system. If you throw a dart, stick with that system, learn it to the best of your ability and use it. The system isn't going to make the difference. So I'm going back to some other things that I think were in that question because it kind of followed on from there. I think the question sort of seemed to be about tools and like how to connect all that stuff. The answer to that is really going to be, it depends a little bit on what the outcomes of each stage need to be. So I can't necessarily answer that question. I will not answer that question generally because it would be a bad answer. It will depend on like, how are you bringing people to the webinar, right? And is it truly a webinar? Could you just do something like a LinkedIn Live, right? So if you're generating your leads with LinkedIn ads, you'll actually be better off to run a LinkedIn Live unless there's something specific that you need to do within the webinar that can't be done there. So if I'm just screen sharing, if I'm just talking, I need some ability to comment, but maybe I don't need to run live polls. Maybe I don't need a really sophisticated chat. Maybe it doesn't need to be private or locked down. I don't need registration. You can do registration with LinkedIn Live. You want to think about those things. So it's sort of like, think about the map of what needs to happen, not where it's going to happen, right? Because if you don't do that, here's the danger. If I tell you, Webinar Jam, amazing, go do this. You're going to go look at Webinar Jam and you'll be like, okay, what does it do? How does it do it? How do they recommend I run webinars? You're all of a sudden going to forget what your own game plan was and why. And you're going to start trying to fit yourself. It's the same thing Will and I said today about pitch decks. Do not go download a pitch deck template and then try to fit how to cram your information into it. You're going to change your function for form, not the way this should work. Okay? Think about what needs to happen. How am I going to track people to it? Once they're there, what do I need to be able to deliver? What is it that I'm doing in my delivery that leads them to whatever the next important action I'm going to have them take? Is there a follow-on email? Is there a next step with a product sign up? Is there another event? What is the thing that I want to have happen on the back side of that and after that and after that? So I think there was mention about landing pages and some other stuff in there. It depends, right? Sometimes a landing page isn't required. If I'm marketing on LinkedIn, for example, go back to this. I do not want to take someone from LinkedIn to a landing page, back to LinkedIn for the LinkedIn Live, unless I need to. If there's some really specific reason, like I have to gather qualifying information that I cannot do through a LinkedIn lead form or the registration page, then do that, right? Just, you gotta come up with a hierarchy of what's really important for you and then build the system based on that. So I'm sorry I can't answer that question specifically, but without a lot of detail around exactly what they're trying to execute, my answer would lead them in the wrong direction.
You're right. And a lot of founders get sidetracked by a certain feature. For example, it says, okay, we need texting reminder, right?
Yep.
Now, I've been very successful with webinars without text reminders. So I'm not going to make a decision based on that. But if I find out that all the people want text reminders and that's going to help as I've been practicing and learning, then yeah, I will go look at a solution, say which one is going to give me text reminders. And so I would corroborate with what Ryan says, is just start with the basics and learn what it's going to take. Probably practice with a few webinar formats, manually invite everybody and just say, hey, show up to this Google Meet or Zoom. Let's practice this and then go from there and then start building a funnel, because I would hate for founders to spend money on stuff that they're just not going to use, that they thought was a good idea, or they were told it's a good idea, but it's not a good idea.
And it's the money, but it's also the time.
Oh, yeah.
I find that when we start to engage in these really, like, we try to make these things way more complex than they need to be. We try to build a really robust system, only to find out that, like, we get onto webinars and people don't like our webinars, or our people just don't like webinars in general, or the webinar didn't achieve the results that we wanted. We spend a ton of time. It's the same thing with, like, founders agonizing over product features before they release the product, because they're trying to perfect things. I want the system to be exactly as it is before we get it out there. With webinars in particular, like, it's a practice skill, right? Ed, you and I do a lot of these things, and so we're very comfortable talking in a situation like this. I jump on a lot of early stage founder webinars, and they are not necessarily very comfortable talking, nor do they know what they're talking about yet, and like they get thrown off by a single question. All of a sudden, things are off the rails. So go and test the parts that are most important. It's the same thing I'll tell founders when they're trying to figure out how to build their business, or should I build this business? Start with the biggest, like the binary. If this works, we're great. If this doesn't work, we're dead in the water. Test those pieces first, right? SMS is not going to make or break your webinar. It may incrementally improve it, right? A landing page may have an incremental improvement over using a registration form directly on LinkedIn. But start with the basics and then start to level up, right? None of this stuff is very complicated either. So it's not like if you start on LinkedIn, it's like, oh, well, I have always done this on LinkedIn. It will be so costly to switch to Webinar Jam. It's not.
Yeah, I totally agree. Hopefully we answered that question for you, founder. If you got some follow-ups, let us know.